your age is very likely not to consist just of a flat surface on which you can run around, but it will have stairs, it will have terrains with hills and valleys that you can walk over. However, checking for collision with these objects can be quite demanding for the engine. So in this tutorial I'm going to show you two possibilities on how you can reduce this load. By the way, if you're looking for a nice freeware program to create terrains, I can recommend TerraGen by PlanetSide Software. They have a freeware version where you can detail the terrain and then export it into 3D Studio Max. For the sake of this tutorial, I'll just create a new plane, call it terrain, and here click on the name of the perspective viewport with the right mouse button. This brings up a menu where you can select edged faces so you can see the faces a little bit better. And let's increase the face count. And already you can see that our object now consists of 800 faces, quite a lot. Let's go to the Modify tab and add the noise modifier. Let's bring down the scale and add some noise to it. Perhaps like this. So quite clearly, you can't just use box collision or sphere collision on this object. You need exact collision for 800 faces. That can be quite a lot, and this is not even a large terrain. So here is the way how to optimize that. With the terrain object selected and in move mode, hit the shift key on your keyboard and move the object along one of its axes, and you can see that 3D Studio Max creates a copy of it. And if you let go of the mouse button and the shift key, let's select copy and call it proxy terrain. So right now this is exactly the same object with the same face count. However, we are going to change this by, with the object selected, clicking on the modify panel and add a new modifier, optimize. And already you can see that Max is starting to take out some of these faces, and you can optimize it even further by adjusting the face threshold and the edge threshold. Let's just move that up, and you can see it gets optimized on the fly, and also the same for the faces and edges, like this. If you move the terrain back over the original now, you can see that it very closely matches the original terrain, yet when you look at the face count here, we have less than half the faces. So with this setup, let's bring up the component manager. Of course, you would need to create a new page file, but we are not going to do this for this tutorial. I'm just going to add physics terrain, and let's rename it to terrain collision exact alternative, and let's select our original terrain and assign it this component. And in the component utility you can now check exact collision checking, but using an alternate shape. Click on none, and when it is highlighted, click H on your keyboard to bring up the object selection dialog. Click on the proxy terrain and hit pick, and now the engine knows that it is not going to check with the original object for collision, but with the new object which has the reduced face count. And this way you can reduce load on the engine. By the way, with this workflow where you assign an alternate object for collision checking, the engine tells this alternate object, in this case the red one with the reduced face count, it tells it not to render, so you don't need to worry about that. It won't show up, only the original terrain will show up. And that is one way to improve collision checking. In this example, the avatar wants to get from the floor up to this box, but the problem is we need some kind of stairs for him to go up there. First, let's hide the floor object. And then, of course, you would model these stairs a little bit more intricately than I do here. I will just go to the Create panel, and instead of standard primitives, I'll go down to Stairs and select Straight Stair. With the first click and drag, you define from where to where you want the stairs to go. Then with the second click, you define how wide they will be, and then finally, the height of the stairs. Let's just make sure that they are rotated correctly. Okay. The problem is, this is again an object with a very high face count, and you could check hull collision, but your avatar is very likely to float over the stairs in this case, because the hull collision is a very general approximation of the shape. Also, you can't use the optimize modifier that we just looked at, because this object just doesn't work with it. The faces are 90 degrees towards each other, and that can't be optimized very well by Max. Instead, what we're going to do is change to the left viewport here, so this is a side view of our staircase, and in the Create panel, go to Splines, Line. Make sure that you have corner selected here and corner selected here, and now click on the top portion of the stairs, just one click, and don't drag, just let go, and you can see that you start drawing a line here. When you hit Shift on your keyboard and hold it down, the drawing is restrained to 90 degrees angles, which is okay. Go down to the floor, even a little bit below it, click once, go over here, click again, and finally come back up to the first point, and when you click on it, it asks you close spline, yes, okay. Let's switch back to the perspective viewport and bring this object over to one end of the staircase. And let's call it Proxy Stairs. Now right now this is just a 2D spline object. However, if you select it and go to the Modify tab, you can select Extrude. When you now increase the amount, you will see that this object becomes a real 3D object. With this setup, let's create some new components. Bring up the component utility. Of course, first you need to select the stairs and the proxy stairs and add them to our page info. But we will also create a new physics proxy terrain component. And let's rename that to Proxy Terrain Collision Hull, because in this case hull collision is okay, and assign the red object, our proxy object, to this component. Now let's close our component manager, come back to the component utility, and with the proxy object selected, click on Proxy Terrain Collision Hull. What you want to check here is physically obstruct camera. This way, the camera is blocked by this red shape and it can't move, for example, under the staircase. I wouldn't recommend checking Avoid Box, because that makes the camera avoid the complete bounding box of the object, and that is too much in this case. And Hull is the correct setting here. Well, let's save the scene. And let's export it. Go to Drizzle, convert it, and start up Euro. And let's see what we've got. Link to our test age. Here is our staircase. You can also see that with this workflow, the engine tells the proxy object to be invisible because it knows it's just there for collision checking. And when we now go to these stairs, you can see that our avatar walks up these stairs, and I would say it does a pretty good job of actually matching the stairs. Of course, you can fine-tune this, and we arrive up here and everything is fine. Especially at the end of the design process, I would advise you to use these optimizations so that also people with an older PC can enjoy your age.